Welcome back to the Growth Nexus podcast. This episode is packed with insight, candor, and refreshing honesty about the state of design, leadership, and staying human in an increasingly automated world. I'm joined by Anthony Armendariz, the CEO of Funsize, a design agency based in Austin that helps companies bring new digital products and brands to life. Anthony brings a unique perspective, half designer, half business leader, who's passionate about creating lasting partnerships and prioritizing human connection in an AI-saturated industry. We explore what it means to build meaningful relationships with clients, why great design is only table stakes, and how brands can differentiate through story, emotion, and authenticity. Plus, we dig into how Anthony and his team think about AI, not as a shortcut, but as a tool to support divergent creativity and accelerate value without replacing people. So if you're ever wrestling with the balance of innovation and identity in your work, or you just want to have a grounded conversation about doing business the way you want, this episode is definitely for you. Well, hey, what's up? And welcome back to the Growth Nexus podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Anthony Armendariz with me. He comes from a business known as Funsize. I'm going to let him do a brief introduction to himself, and then we're going to have a fun conversation.
My name's Anthony. I've spent half of my career as a designer and the other half of my career running a design agency. So former designer who's running a design shop based in Austin, Texas. We have two businesses. Funsize, our design studio that does 0 to 1 strategic work for clients and brand design work, and another business called Friends that does embedded consulting. Our work is mostly specifically in brand design and digital product design, serving most usually technology companies. That's a brief summary.
Yeah, cool.
So I could go on forever.
Yeah. Well, I'll share some links because I definitely think you guys have a very a fun website. Not to no pun on words, but it is, it's a cool website. It's got a really cool just design element to it, which is unique, because there's just so much stale stuff. So I just wanted to call that out. I'll share links to all that, and it's definitely a fun site to click around in.
When you have fun in your name, there's a lot of pressure to make sure everything's fun.
Yeah, for sure. So like you said, you've been in the space for a long time. And, one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit on this channel is how businesses are growing and adapting. We've talked about AI. I know that you guys work with some different AI companies. We've talked about how that impacts the people side of things. It's impacting the design side of things. So it really has shaped and changed so much of our world today. And I think there's a lot of people that, when they look at technology, they look at AI, they look at all these things happening, not really sure where to go. How over time with new technologies and really with the processes that you're doing?
Well, this one is a little bit challenging for us because most of what we feel we bring to the table is a very specific customer experience, which is mostly about the way we as humans work with other humans to help them accomplish the goals within their organization or even their personal goals. So everything that we do has to have humans at the forefront. There are ways in which we are using or consider using AI, but we have a pretty strong opinion about really not depending on it as a critical path for how we do work. We know it'll fit into our work somehow,
yeah,
or in different ways and offer value. We don't see it as a way to create, faster, cheaper projects. We see it as a way to offer additional value. So as long as we're finding ways to use AI in that capacity, at least for now, that seems to make the most sense to accelerate divergent work as an example, or experimenting with, creating LLMs or models that are based on a specific designer's design style, so that you can create more divergent work. Like, for example, if they're not on the project, you could still get, work might have been done in the flavor of that person. But I would, and then, everything else that we're doing right now is kind of in our R&D, group of our work where we're trying to figure out what we're really going to do long term about it. We know it's a critical thing. We know we got to stay on the forefront of it, but we definitely don't aim to be one of these kind of companies that is pivoting completely to AI and stuff like that. So Yeah, we're trying to find the right balance that makes the most sense for us, because we think that like 80 to 90% of all the real work is the human relationships, and about 10 to 20% is the actual design work. And the good design work is the table stakes, no matter who's creating it, like a human or a machine. But if you don't have these other parts, then like, what's the point of an agency? Like
Yep.
it's got, someone's going to hire an agency or a consulting company or services business. They really got to be able to get something more than just the work output.
Yeah, I think that's been maybe the problem with a lot of like, the last 10, 15 years of some of the agency work is it's just a transaction-based model. And you're seeing those companies kind of go by the wayside. But I really like the differentiator, and it's something that we've been trying to lean on to internally, is the human side. Keeping a human in the loop. Like, sure, these tools are great, but like, how do we build that relationship? How do we um, make that connection with the people we're working with in order to build a lasting relationship that really they see as more as like a partner instead of just this do the to-do list people. Like, we hand them something and they churn something out. So how in this world where they're typically, you've got the extremes where people just automate everything without thinking, and you've got some resistant to it, where you guys are finding that balance. What are some of the things that you're doing in order to ensure the human in the loop, that they're still creating that person to person value?
I mean, I would have to put us on the spectrum of not really using AI much at all.
Yeah, for sure.
To using it, like we're very, very much on the earlier end of that spectrum, actually trying to figure out how we will use AI, or if we will. And it's
Yeah.
debatable whether we will use it or not.
Yeah.
Uh, right now, it's really limited in very specific types of certain kinds of work. Like, for example, if an entrepreneur is thinking about launching a new business, it seems reasonable that, since time and money is not unlimited in the world in general, but especially in this market where checks aren't being written, that it makes sense to use something like AI to generate lots of different prototypes or
Right.
brands or landing pages and stuff like that can accelerate the entrepreneur's understanding of the business that they might create, and how the market might react to it before they go start writing code and stuff like that. So that's a really good example where we think it makes sense, because it's not about getting it right. It's about testing how the entrepreneur feels about the journey that we're about to embark on, and what their customers might be looking for, if what they're thinking aligns. Other examples would be divergent work, like I mentioned
Yep.
earlier. Like, you still have to have a creative director and a team, like with the design strategy. But if you have good strategic thinking, using some of these tools can accelerate, like, divergent work, like mood boarding.
Right.
To get it to a certain point where you're looking at like hundreds of examples and narrowing them down, versus using all that manual hours to create,
Yeah.
those artifacts. It's the same artifacts, just create a little bit differently. But anytime where the real, where things intersect with doing real work, I would imagine that we will always be doing that
Yeah.
directly.
So how I'm curious too, because I know that you guys work with some larger brands at times, and how um, I'm sure they appreciate that human touch. Can you maybe share a little bit about why you've chosen the paths that you've chosen, even at this time? Because I think it's a bold strategy. I think it's a good strategy. Um, but also because there is so much noise, right? There is so much buzz and all these things, but like, you guys are like being super intentional. Um, and I really like that. And I'm curious what maybe some of the feedback is, even in the actual workspace, maybe even with your staff, what is kind of the response in that?
Well, I think generally speaking, humans just simply want to work with people that they like. And a lot of times we'll even make concessions in order to simply work with people that they like. That's just us as human beings. Like, we are created to form tribes and, connect with people, and connection is really important. Like, you want to work with people that you want to work with, that you like to work with. There's empathy and understanding, a mutual desire to help each other out beyond the work,
Right.
so like, most of our, for the last 13 years, most of our business building has been working with a very limited set of people and working with them as they go from company to company, and bringing us in on those different points of the journey. And I think that's because we not only like it is probably because we accomplish the missions well on that work, but it's also because like we truly champion them. What are they trying to achieve in their career? Are they trying to get a promotion? Are they trying to move jobs? Are they trying to like get big ideas pushed through? Like how can we actually help them accomplish their goals? And that's not ever something that any machine will ever do. That it is
Right.
human relationship. It's spending time with people, talking to them, you know, and as in close proximity as you can. And that's just the kind of business that we want to run. Um, I think right now in today's market is a little bit different because it is very much a buyer's market, and it's a global market, and there's so much optionality for people to achieve what they need to achieve. Design is not as misunderstood as it used to be, though it is still, there's a lot of room to grow there, but people know design a lot more
Mhm.
than they used to. And they have design teams and they have capabilities, and they are clients are the vertical experts. So, and when they want to work with someone, they have any option imaginable, right? They
Right.
can use all kind of tools. They can hire any amount full-time people or freelancers or people in different countries. They can control their costs. They can do that work however they want to. But because companies have leaned up in specialization areas, where I'm seeing the most um, exciting things for our company is in the specialization work areas, which number one, makes me excited because I think that a lot of that was lost in general over the pandemic years. But I think there's maybe a bit of more of selection based on expertise versus the friendly relationships. I
Mm.
guess it kind of depends on what kind of thing you're working on. Like if you're going to work with someone for a year or two or three or more, like maybe you make an argument that you index a little bit more to like the relationship. If you're going to work together for 2, 4, 6 weeks, and it's something very specific that has to produce a very specific result, sure, the connection makes a difference, but the argument, is that, people are going to choose the experts and the machines are not the experts.
Yeah. I think that's such a commonly believed mistake that artificial intelligence knows all. But if you actually understand the language models and how they're trained and actually how they work, they're trained for specific tasks. They're trained to listen to inputs and give you outputs regardless, even if it's true or not, right? While they've cleaned up some of the hallucinations and things like that, they're still not, infinite, but they're helpful in like running these small tasks. But I'm also excited about the fact that like when you specialize, when you niche, when you add that human element, like you said, I've always talked to my team about that, behind the screen, behind the click, behind the web visit's a human being. It's a person, so we have to think about that individual and who we're interacting with and how we're interacting with them. Like, are we helping them? Are we helping the searcher, for our business? Are we helping them achieve their goal? But then you also pointed back to like the stakeholder, the person that, maybe we're working one-on-one with. What internal goals do they want? It's not just like, for me, it's not just traffic and leads. They're trying to promote themselves most of the time internally, right? They report to somebody. What is their goal? And how can we
Yeah.
partner with them to help them be successful? And I think that's sadly, I think it's not a thing that we see all the time in business, right? We have this very much transaction or like, like we're competing almost even with our clients. When reality is it's like, well, maybe if we kind of sought after like, hey, how can I actually help you, serve you, you know, position you, whatever, like be that extra additive. And even if it's not like specifically project design, like you even talked about personal goals, like, they want a promotion. Well, what does that have to do with my design work? Maybe nothing, but it has everything to do with the relationship. And like you said, like what's really cool, like these people have brought you along the way. And as you're thinking that, and I was actually thinking today, it's kind of funny, kind of go this angle in the conversation, just about lead generation, right? And, specifically on our site. And I was like, man, who's generated the most leads are the people that I've invested deep relationships with and connections with over time, where we've done good work. Sometimes the work hasn't even worked, right? Like we failed, but we did something really cool together and they still trusted us through the process because we were transparent and they've journeyed with us from business to business and introducing us to others. So I actually should be leaning my time on relationship building and being more intentional to build those relationships more than just having cold leads who may or may not care or want to do anything with my business. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think there's also like, a balance, like what happens when all of
yeah,
everyone in your Rolodex is experiencing the same economic challenges, or like one of the things that I've realized lately is what happens when your relationships start to retire
yeah,
and they actually, bow out of LinkedIn and stuff like that, like, so I think for us, like that, relationship-based business is definitely what we wanted. But I think that, in this current market cycle, I think the mistake that we made was not investing soon enough in and looking, seeking and looking for net new
right,
uh, relationships and opportunities.
for
We
sure.
we eventually did, but I think had we hopped on that horse a little bit sooner, it might have been different because like a lot of our business is account based, multi-year work with big organizations, and all of these big tech companies have all experiencing the same squeeze. So not only that, but just being transparent, like another realization is not just like I am who I am, and I'm a connector, and I meet with people, but everyone has their own has their own like networks.
Yeah,
Like a lot of the people that I know are like they do similar things. Like we realized a couple of years ago that it would be probably pretty smart for us to not just work in the technology sector.
yeah,
Um, it was just what was easy for us because that's where the relationships were and stuff like that. But like also if you think about going upstream, if it is true that all the technology companies have some level of design maturity now that they probably didn't when we started our process, 13 years ago. The companies that aren't, the companies that really need an expert are people that sometimes don't have that level of maturity. And like for us, that was a realization that, okay, maybe some of the most interesting opportunities are actually not going to come from the technology sector.
yeah. And I think it's still like while I say like the relationship leaning into that's really important. Um, yeah, having like diversified ways to connect with people obviously is, still have to, why we create content and do video and to hope that we connect with somebody else that says, hey, you know, so I like those people. Those people seem like they know what they're talking about. And, one of the best comments I've ever gotten from an email was, I've been watching your YouTube for a while and you seem like you're not going to screw me over. Which is great in the marketing space, right? Because I was like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. So apparently I'm not coming across like some of the people that I don't want to come across like. And, so leveraging those channels and build relationships for sure and net new and yeah, the diversifying, that's another great aspect of this too. And that's not something you can always just leverage to technology because, just what market should I go in, Well, that for instance, I know people that go and, try to do drop shipping and things like that today, and I'm like, you're going into these markets that are way oversaturated, and you've got these companies overseas that can crush you in a matter of minutes because of the technology you have behind them. You're looking at the wrong metrics. So like for me, I kind of looked at when we started to diversify outside of tech because that's what we were super tech heavy, and a couple years ago, and even now, but even a couple years ago, like the pandemic stuff, when this massive layoffs were coming and contracts were dropping left and right, and it wasn't anything to do with work. It was like we don't have any money to do this anymore. So, I started to look at, okay, what are some of the pseudo related industries that we could work in? What are the relationships that we've had before? We got into some, government type stuff and manufacturing business, kind of diversified a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
but what maybe some tips that you've experienced in that kind of diversification and looking for projects that may have been outside of your wheelhouse that kind of helped?
Well, number one, I think because it's a market where people are looking for specialists, we had definitely for the very first, like the last 3 months, the only time in our company's history where we've ever received qualified leads through our website ever. It qualified in the sense that they are looking for exactly what we want to do.
Right.
It's the type of work we would want to do, and they have the budget and all that. That was really surprising for us because we had never really seen that before. Similar to you, like, one of the goals is making sure that we don't put ourselves in the box, so
Yeah.
we experiment, like when we share, portfolios and reels and stuff like that, we've been experimenting with different angles of the work, because to be perfectly honest, like other companies, I think everyone's trying to figure out, okay, the new norms are gone. What are the what the old norms are gone? What are the new norms? Where do we fit into these new norms, and trying to like adapt, but also make sure you're adapting in a way that you want to go in,
Right.
podcasting, like some of the things you talked about, content is a great way to do that too. Because, like going beyond just like for us, it meant going beyond just talking with design leaders to talking with artists and lawyers and, different kinds of people with very different perspective, all kind of centered around similar content. But that has really helped us reach, get out of the tech bubble.
Yep.
And, and get and tell our stories, to a much wider audience. Yeah. I mean, just a couple of examples.
No, that's yeah. I think that's, just practical, right? Like kind of like putting some bait out and seeing, what comes your way, and is this interesting? Is this going to be a good product? Is it a good fit? Like I think a lot of people when they start businesses, we maybe take on projects we shouldn't take on because we got to get revenue. But you get to a point where you actually are allowed to like say no. You're allowed to like choose work that's going to be fun and exciting, and that really builds you into a way to do more of that fun and exciting work. Um, yeah, I think that's the content angle is huge, and I think this is where too like the AI gets involved, right? Where people go, oh wow, I can just automate everything out to a bot and generate all this content, but to your point again from the beginning, if it lacks human connection, if it lacks a sense of like reality to the human soul, people are just going to go past it. I don't care if it's technical content or if it's creative content. Like people know if it's just stale robotic content. There's a lot of people now, they're like, hey, you can automate your whole podcast and make an AI version of yourself and you never have to record anything. And I'm like, what's the point of that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it kind of depends. Like, like Perplexity did that with their daily podcast,
Mhm.
but it makes sense. They're dog fooding. They're using their own tool to create
Right.
a daily podcast. That makes sense. I mean, the force multiplier thing I think is big. Yeah, I met a guy through the Society of Digital Agencies during South by, and they were talking about a case study about how they used AI to produce like a global ad campaign for a candy brand.
Yep.
Well, it wasn't an efficiency play; it was more of an impact play.
Right.
They had a team of 25 people creating different models, stylistic models, like building models on like illustration style, motion style, um, graphic style, all, and so that they could deliver that content to efficiently to every market.
Yeah.
And all the different form factors and stuff. It wasn't a thing where the client was expecting, oh, it's going to make the work faster and cheaper. It actually was more expensive,
Right.
but it made for a better global campaign. So I think it depends on the app, the application of it, who's doing it, like, but yeah, as long as it's I don't know.
We have to have a human.
I'm just, like, I don't have any issue with technology per se, but I guess in some way I'm kind of old and set in my ways. Like there's a way that I like to do design, or that I like design to be done.
Yeah.
And I know that AI fits into that somewhere, but I worry about the long-term impacts of what AI will do to the human memory of knowing how to do a craft skill or any kind of skill. And I think that people aren't really thinking deeply enough about what the long-term human impact is generations from now.
No, I love that you're going there, because to me, one of my big areas that I've been just personally studying is the ethics behind it. Machines have no ethics. They only have what's been inputted into them, right? They're not thinking about 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, think about the societal impacts of social media, the societal impacts of like complete digital lifestyles, right? What that's already done to the human brain chemically. And we've seen that. We've seen the tests. We know that addictions on like social media, it actually has the same kind of brain effects that like having addictions to like crack cocaine does. Like you can see it in brain scans, like the brain actually warping based on a addiction to a device. Um, and we don't slow down to think about that because we're getting instant gratification. So it's hitting our dopamine sectors, but we're just actually destroying our dopamine, triggers, because we want that instant gratification. We don't think about the long-term impacts. And I think you're right, and that's one of the reason I actually still, Austin Colon? He's an artist, and he's from
No.
Texas too. Um, he's got a couple books. I really like these. One of his books is Steal Like an Artist. Um, but he thinks very differently about things. And one of the things that he brings to the digital table is starting analog before you go digital. And I still do that quite a bit. Like today, I was working on a strategy, a business plan for a client. I mapped it out all on paper first, using the data and stuff that I pulled, but I mapped everything on paper before I put it into a document, before I'll go build a brief or any of that stuff. And I'll leverage artificial intelligence to help milk it shiny and all that. But I start analog because I want to use my brain. I don't want my brain to decay. And honestly, there are things and there's connections that I'll make emotionally that a computer will never make, that a software will never be able to do. And the other reason he's big on that is, in that book, Steal Like an Artist, he says, because it's too easy to hit the delete key. If I'm scribbling on paper, I may have had a good idea hour late or before that I just passed by because I just kept moving,
Yeah.
right? And if I did it on the computer, I would have deleted that. And now I just lost something really important. Um, and maybe something that could have been really helpful in the end. So
Sure.
yeah, we need to find this balance, and nobody's having that conversation because we like the speed. We like the access, we like the familiarity. And I mean, I use build AI workflows and all of that sort of thing too, like you're talking about. Um, but I think this idea of like thinking about the long-term ramifications of how we're using certain technologies and how we can use it responsibly, ethically, in a way that's going to promote good as opposed to destroying things. Um, and I think the big future is kind of what you're talking about in that design campaign too. Isn't large language models? It's small language models. It's building custom language models to help assist you on a certain task. But in order to do that, you have to have a master overseeing that. Somebody who knows, who's got skill set, who's got the background to really understand what's happening in that sphere so that we don't ever disconnect it from the human, because that's how real
It's
truth.
yeah, and it's all. I mean, if AI as a peer is one thing, right, to help you do some of your tasks, but if we want AI to really be a co-pilot, like the model has to be you. It can't be an aggregate of of averages on the internet. It has to be you. If you ever expect it to do things anywhere close to the way you would do them, or get information the way you want to get information. So to me that makes sense. And also um, from a security standpoint, it makes sense. I mean, just think about all the information these systems have about us already. I don't know, like I don't I don't really want more megacorps, knowing much more about me. I'm a little bit, yeah, I don't know, like I struggle with the topic of AI because, like, to be perfectly honest, I don't care for it. Um, and I've kind of, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, but it's just not really something that excites me
Yeah.
at all, at a personal level.
Yeah.
And I have to cope with it because I know it's gonna, you know, be a part of things, but
Yeah.
I have a personal struggle with it. I mean, I don't know where, like, my dad was a designer before the, personal computer came out. When the personal computer came out, he was like, nope, I'm done. And, he shut down his business. It was something that he deeply cared about. Yeah, I don't think he has any regrets on that. He
Yeah.
did something different. And I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to stand on that. Like, who knows? Like, if I'm not doing, like, especially when you're running your own business, right? Like,
Right.
business owner deserves to be able to, like, be happy in the business that they're running. And so if any kind of technology or any trend or anything happens that causes me to not have personal excitement in what I do, I'm done. I'll just go do something else.
Yeah. I think that's really, commendable too, because like, I don't think everybody realizes that you actually have that choice. Like you can choose to say, no, this is where I stop. And your dad seemed to have that conviction. So you have that conviction. I think that's really important. And I think what you feel is honestly what a lot of people feel. Where I'm very interested in these things, and I think it comes from I'm very interested in brain chemistry and how language works in general and how we think and why we do things and like how we're modeling that into computers. But at the same time, I have very, very significant issues and fears and concerns with what's being done as well, which I think is, one of the reasons I do like to talk about it and study it because I want to know as much as I can about what is happening for some of the similar reasons. There will be a point one day maybe I just unplug everything and hang out with my chickens, and I'll be cool with that, like, I'll do my own thing.
Could be a good business right now. Eggs are expensive, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, if you're in the Malabar, Florida area, you can come by the homestead, we sell eggs here. So, it's been, like I said, you've gotta find those things that make you happy. So let me ask you this, what does excite you? What is something right now that is just like, that's got you excited?
What I'm excited about right now in my bubble of the industry is it feels like it's a resurgence, a newfound interest and appreciation for the importance of branding and positioning and content. Because anyone can do UX and UI design now. And like we talked about earlier, it's global and machines can do it. But what it can't do is differentiate products
Yeah.
or brands in a sea of stuff. And, there's always, like whether you're a design agency or a to-do list or a ride sharing app or whatever, there's multiple competitors in any category. And what ultimately is going to connect with people is some type of differentiator, a founder story or some aesthetic or some way a button animates when you press it. Like it's getting down to those, like that 5 to 10% of the finesse that like really connects with people, because you can't just like go make a product now and expect that people are going to use it or that investors are going to give you money.
Yeah.
It really has to be differentiated. And I think like in our industry, maybe it was not entirely forgotten, but it wasn't prioritized.
No, for sure.
So I'm excited about that. And so that, like the work that we're doing in the studio right now is some of the most exciting work that I've seen in a long time. Maybe it's because it's not what like we used to do. Um, I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is, but it feels different. I think it's kind of putting, it's bringing up some interesting conversations about how far we lean into that,
Yeah.
because, we could, do other work, but like to your point earlier, how much of that work is value versus transactional?
Right.
And, I think that, to survive, in any industry, you want to be as, upstream as you can be. Um,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, but that's probably the thing right now that like most energizes me about our business or our industry. I mean, on a personal level, I'm generally most energized by making my own content, and I don't make design anymore, and I'm not even running the designing department anymore. So like like this incarnation of myself is to tell stories of other people that are doing that stuff. And I find a lot of joy from doing that, a lot of research, R&D
Yeah.
from doing that. I continue to learn by doing that. So
Yeah.
that's what's keeping me sharp. That's what's keeping me energized.
Yeah, I think that's I think you're right on the head too, because I mean we've seen this, my background being in, search and a lot of that having to do with content. But even the technical side, like the importance of having brand identity and understanding that people are they're not necessarily always even choosing between products, more so that they're choosing a brand. They're choosing a brand that they trust, and then they'll choose the products with under that brand has to offer. And they'll pick a brand even if it doesn't have everything that they want, just because they trust the brand more than they trust the other brand. And I think there's so much value to that. Um, and so I think that's really cool that you're handling, because that's a little bit of a even in the technical space, there's a lot of things that we do, promoting brand, um, you know, on that angle. And then storytelling. I think that's something that like you said before, like humans, we're tribal. We love story. We've been learning through story since we began communicating with each other. Like there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to that. But yet we want to overcomplicate and finesse and try to but like sitting down and sharing a story. Like I think about my kids like all the time, like we're driving to baseball practice or stuff. They're like, "Dad, tell me a story when you were younger." Like they crave story, and I crave story too. That's, why certain shows make it and the other ones don't, or conversations people we like to hang out with because of the stories we have together. Um, so I think that's beautiful, and I think the content you guys are putting out is really cool, and I'm really excited for the podcast that we talked about last time that I know you guys are working on, some post production stuff with, right, with all the
Yeah.
travel and cool things you did. That's going to be pretty awesome as well. Um,
But yeah, it's fun.
yeah, but it is, and I think that's again, and we talk about creating those connections humanly and building relationship with each other. Keeping that in the forefront. Technology is going to be here. Technology is not just a artificial intelligence, or whatever. There's going to be something new in another 2 years.
Yeah.
But are we staying true to who we want to be, and are we building businesses that get us excited, or are we just going through the grind? Because I had a guy years ago, that offered to buy my business and bring me into this thing. He's like, "You'll have this, security and job," and I was like, I don't care about that. Like, that's not why I don't do this to make money. I could have a lot less stress and make a lot more money. That's not why I do this. So I'm not
Yeah.
interested.
Totally.
And it blew his mind. He's like, you don't want to, I was like, I don't care. Like I have everything I need and want. I do this because I like the people I work with. I get to do exciting projects and research and build relationships and solve unique problems every day. If I work for you, I've got to be at a desk at a certain time. Like, I'll hate that. I'll be miserable. Who gives a rip about how much you pay me? So I think having that freedom and recognizing, we can always hit the pause button or try something different. Um,
Yeah, I think it is a forgotten thing in entrepreneurship that, you could run your business for forever the way you want, or you could decide to just turn it off. Like it's just, we need we need that, people need that kind of freedom. I mean, just like non-business owners have the same amount of freedom, like, to work where they want,
yeah.
resign when they want, switch careers when they want. I think entrepreneurs need to give themselves that same freedom, because there's no written rule that says just because you start a business, you have to keep doing it forever or do it the same way. But I think a lot of people do feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. You build these systems and stuff. I mean, you can ask my team why we pivoted multiple times. I started as a video production company in 2008. That's what we started with, right? And I was doing work with I was still living in Jacksonville and doing film work. This is when you still had to shoot on mini DVs and run everything back with Firewire and all that fun stuff. Um, but I quickly found out that after everything crashed in 2008, like nobody's paying for video work. But somebody was like, "I like your website," and I was like, "Well, I can build websites," and I started getting curious about some of these other ways I could leverage, and pivoted there. And then I went super broad and did all these things. And I was like, I hate half of this stuff. Like, I hate social media. I hate all of these weird things, and just niched back down. And, um, it's been nice. But there have been at times where like, well, that one client really wants me to do this. And I was like, but I hate that. And I'm not very good at it because I don't like it. So why don't we just tell them, hey, we're not going to do that anymore because we're not very good at it, but we can do this stuff even better. Um,
I
and
mean,
it's,
back to the relationship thing. I mean, people need to hear that. Like, you know, like people, like that builds trust by
yeah,
saying, like, not going to serve you well by doing something that we're not excited about or have the expertise in.
right.
Uh, you know, that is probably like an example of mega trust, right? Because most people will be inclined to say, "Oh yeah, we'll do it. We'll take it. We'll figure it out," right?
Yeah.
You know, but yeah,
Yeah. But it's been fun. And I think you're right on that entrepreneur journey. We need to give ourselves a little bit more grace than we do. Stop taking it so serious sometimes and go, is this what I want to do? You know, um, my kids, again, I always bring back to them. I think sometimes I want to do this when I grow up. What did you want to do when you were younger? And I was like, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And I think that's cool. I don't have to settle. Like, this is what I'm doing today and I'm having a good time doing it. Do I have to do the rest of my life? No. And I honestly, I hope I get to do more things. I hope I get to try different things that I've never tried before. So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. I mean, that's how I feel as well, and try to feel okay with that. You know, and doing it in ways that aren't disruptive. Like, you know, like I don't know. Yeah, like trying to explore different avenues for the business or the industry and stuff without being too disruptive. I try to like think about how like having multiple playbooks running
yep.
at the same time, like today, you know, near term, and like crazy ideas for the future, but try to,
Right.
you know, keep those in sync so, you know, people aren't confused.
Yeah. No, that's true too. I always think of like those bands, there's like that are like a little bit too ahead of their time, that were like really cool doing experimental stuff, but they were like a little bit too out there that if they just would have pulled back, they probably would have actually got their breakthrough. But, there's a bunch of bands that I used to listen to that I'm like, man, if they would have like released this 4 years later, they would have been huge. But because they were too far ahead and too little experimental, they totally, it didn't work out for them. But it's kind of the same thing in business. We have to think like, I can't be too crazy. Like you said, even in language, we've been doing that lately, it's like, all right, what we call this internally, we can't say that externally. People have no idea what we're talking about. We just need to use plain common language and make this super human and relational so they understand and they're not like, wait, what do you do? That's weird. No one's doing that. I'm not going to pay for that.
Yeah.
Just like, this is what we do. We just do it better because of this. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Just keeping it simple. So, but, um, well, Anthony, this is a fun conversation. I mean, I really appreciate your vulnerability and even sharing, likes and dislikes and just your heart and what you guys are doing. I'm excited to check out more of your podcasts and more of the content as you guys put it out there. I've already really enjoyed reading what you already have and listening and watching those episodes from other people on your team. So we'll link to everything in the bio. But yeah, any last words?
No, thank you for having me on. I enjoyed this chat and our earlier one
Yeah, man.
prior to the recording. So if you ever wanna sync up and have another back and forth, hit me up anytime.
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely. I'll be excited too as some of those, branding things go and we kind of see like even how this year evolves and the economy and all that fun stuff we get to deal with. I'm sure there'll be some more cool and interesting things to talk about. So thanks for your time, man.
You got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.